You're listening to the Vent Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vent Podcast, a production of the Vent Marketplace, your source for premium wine and spirits at ventmarketplace.com. This episode is presented by Coravin. Coravin is the world leader in at-home wine preservation, allowing you to pour a glass of your favorite wine and enjoy more bottles in your cellar without ever having to pop the cork. And today, we actually have a really great opportunity for you to own a Coravin, and not just any Coravin. They're one of their more recent releases, their sparkling Coravin, which allows you to drink your favorite sparkling wine or champagne, pour as many glasses as you need to from that bottle. Use the sparkling system to recarbonate and preserve your wine for future use. It's amazing. Billy and I both have one. I never thought in my life that I could open a bottle of champagne, have a few glasses, and get the same experience 2 weeks later. But you can now with the sparkling Coravin. Like I said, we are giving one away. The way that you win that Coravin, or to be entered to win that Coravin, is to go to Vent Wine TV on YouTube. That's our YouTube channel. Find this episode. Subscribe to Vent Wine TV, find this episode, and then comment something on this episode, either related to ONEHOPE and our guests today, as you'll hear, or about the wines that you will enjoy with your new sparkling Coravin. We look forward to hearing from all of you, and Billy will be reviewing those comments, and we will have a winner in the next week or so, but we look forward to getting a new Coravin sparkling in one lucky listener's hands. So, as always, I am joined here by Billy Galenko. Billy, the Coravin Sparkling is maybe the coolest offer we've had, I think, on the podcast so far. It's a great device.
Yeah, I agree. When they became our presenting sponsor and let us know that they were going to give us one as well so we could talk about them, I was over the moon because I had always wanted one. I hadn't purchased one yet. So it's really exciting that we can give them away. It's cool the way it works. You open a bottle of a sparkling like you typically would, and then you put this airlock thing on. It repressurizes, but not too much. I would definitely go, if you win or even if you don't win, go listen to the Greg Lambrick episode where he talks about how it works. I was just like, this is some engineering that's beyond my comprehension. But it works.
That's right. Yeah. It's the I think we talked in the past about wanting people to drink more sparkling wine, or people say things like drink more champagne. This actually makes that possible because it can be a challenge to open a bottle of champagne, especially for the price and just like the volume on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and not have at least a little bit of it go flat or bad. And yeah, revolutionary. Excited for whoever wins.
Yeah. So that'll be really exciting. While you're on the YouTube, we also have a great video on grower champagnes to know, so you should check that out as well, and you can figure out what you want to buy and use your Coravin sparkling on if you win.
Nice. Yeah. And if you go really far back in the Vent podcast archive, you'll find Peter Leem, who is an expert on the wines of Champagne. We had a great interview with him.
It's a really cool episode.
Nice. Yeah. Do you want to dive into a little bit about ONEHOPE, our featured guest today?
I was going to touch quickly on this week's news as well.
Oh, you have something?
Yeah, we have. Vent Marketplace news comes out every week. The news doesn't stop.
Yeah, that's right.
So what I wanted to focus on was a wine searcher listing. It's the top 10 wines of New Zealand for 2024. Everybody's coming out with their lists now. I think we talked about last week, Wine Spectators, Venice came out with a list. But these articles, though, I find them interesting. I wanted to just get your opinion as well. As they come out with, quote unquote, the best New Zealand wines of 2024. They just get the top 10 score wines, average scores on Wine Searcher, and then they'll list them and write about them. For me, though, it's interesting because Wine Searcher pulls in scores from all over the place. There's a bunch of different publications. The top 10 here all have an average score of 93 points, and those are apparently the top 10, which I find really interesting. There's a Syrah, there's also a Cabernet Sauvignon, but predominantly they're Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. You're not going to see any of the top 10, quote unquote, by Wine Searcher as Sauvignon Blanc, but I wanted to get your perspective on calling these the best. Do you think it's just because they're considering themselves thought leaders in the space?
I don't know. I feel like would be a challenge just commercially not to recognize Sauvignon Blanc, or at least one producer of Sauvignon Blanc there, as not in the top 10. Just certainly I know that they're producing other wines of extreme quality. But if I'm a winemaker, especially a winemaker of Sauvignon Blanc in New Zealand, and there's so much effort paid towards making New Zealand sort of like, yeah, you think of New Zealand, I think most consumers would think of Sauvignon Blanc, probably. Maybe not like deep wine enthusiasts, but most consumers. So to not have one represented in the top 10 feels like maybe a little weird.
Yeah,
what you were getting at?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think I look at these lists and we have them in the news once in a while because I think it's important for people to see these lineups, but they'll have the most expensive wine in the world, or this one's the best wines from New Zealand. And it's just, they're using their platform as the only resource. And I just think sometimes it's misleading. Yeah. If this is the best New Zealand, and it says on Wine Searcher, but I bet there's really good Riesling in here. I bet there's really good Pinot Gris along with what you're saying, Sauvignon Blanc. So it's funny just calling it the best and being like, we are the source of truth. So
there's probably also a little bit of pressure on Sauvignon Blanc, like pressure on the ratings, right?
For sure. They're not the style, as Karen McNeil said, there's not like a huge range of flavor variation. And it's also, they're not all pulling in high scores or anything. So
yeah, what is it? What is Sauvignon Blanc without acid, right? Absolutely nothing. Yeah, absolutely nothing.
Nick Jackson, MW. Go listen to his episode. He had a great description of Sauvignon Blanc. Basically, went off about what it would be.
What's the point of Sauvignon Blanc if there's no acid?
Yeah, exactly. That was a great one. To list a couple of the highlights from this top 10, regardless of how it was created, I think there's some cool ones in there. They have Rippon's Tinkerfield Mature Vine Pinot Noir. There's also a couple Kimi River Chardonnays, which are also amazing wines. They have some Adirondacke Pinot Noir as well, and some Felton Road. So a bunch of these producers we did call out in our YouTube video of top Pinot Noir regions outside of France. So that's one reason I wanted to highlight this article this week. But also I just have that little bit of beef on the way they claim on Wine Searcher.
We need to do our own. You need to do your own Vint Marketplace top 10 wines in New Zealand.
Yeah, exactly. The best wines from New Zealand on Vint Marketplace.
That's right.
Shall we get to our guest for this week? ONEHOPE.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Our guest for this week is Jake Cleberdens, CEO and co-founder of ONEHOPE Wines. Now, I had actually heard about ONEHOPE while I was teaching a WSET class. Somebody in the class said they were inspired to take this WSET 2 class just from tasting at their Napa tasting room. And I thought it was interesting. I'd never really heard of them. And then I looked it up, and it's a charity-driven company where basically every bottle of wine, you can donate a portion of that, or they donate a portion of that sale, and you can dictate where it goes to a charity of your choice, which I thought was really interesting and a noble cause. What I didn't really realize is the breadth and quality of the wines that they're producing. This conversation was really eye-opening to hear about all the efforts. They have basically tiers of wine for anybody, no matter how serious of a wine drinker you are. And then they also work with some of the top winemakers in Napa to really produce like super high quality wines that are getting some great scores.
Those were the two things, being a sort of like purpose-driven or charity-driven winery. There were a few of those out there, and just candidly, I feel like some of them ride that aspect of their business or let that carry them in their marketing and outreach and sales versus truly making a quality product that both intro wine folks and enthusiasts can get behind. So there's that aspect of them. They're actually making really high quality, thoughtful wine. But the other is that it's not just one cause, and certainly there's nothing wrong with, all of our proceeds go to world hunger or breast cancer, but being able to dictate where your money goes, I feel like that's just a really powerful way to stand on that charity-driven sort of approach to the business. And I think it's super compelling. Someone who likes to try new wines, they have all breadth of wines on their site. And so you certainly find something that you're interested in and be able to give back to a charity or an organization that means a lot to you. So yeah, it was great to hear from Jake, and the grind and inspiration that he took in the early days, and the grind that it's been for that group to have so much success like they have. They've given away a ton of money.
Yeah. It was cool to hear about that, and the authentic beginnings too. It sounds like he had a really meaningful experience, and he actually has just worked his whole life to try to build this. And again, to your point, he mentions like it's fairly easy to have a wine that gives to charity and people buy once just for the novelty of supporting, but the fact that people keep coming back is a testament to their work. And they're having a Black Friday sale on now too that goes through the end of the month, through the 30th. So go check it out. It's 20% off their wines, and I think you get additional if you do on their membership as well. So if you want to, there's like a fun gift for folks if there's a cause that's really meaningful to you and your family, you can donate to that and also send them some of these bottles. So I think it's a perfect gift for this time of year.
Yeah, and it's 10% of every purchase goes to the charity or the cause that the customer selects. So I think that's awesome. I think it says on their site they've donated to over, or helped donate. I shouldn't say they haven't directly donated, but they've helped support and donate to over 40,000 nonprofits since they've been in existence. So that's awesome. Okay, without further ado, let's get into our interview. But first, remember, if you're looking to drink more wine from your cellar without worrying about wasting the wine that you can't consume, one of the Coravin systems will certainly be your best friend. You can visit coravin.com and use code VINT15 for 15% off your purchase here for the holidays off any one of their devices. If you're a member of the trade, you can get extra discounts and perks at trade.coravin.com on their range of products and accessories. And remember, and if you skipped our intro and went right to this portion of the episode, go back to the intro because we talk about our giveaway of our sparkling Coravin. You can hear details on that in our intro, but go to Vint Wine TV, subscribe, find this episode, and make a comment to be entered to win a Coravin sparkling device, which will be awesome to have around the holidays to share more sparkling wine with loved ones. And so without further ado, here's our interview with Jake Kloberdanz.
Hi, Jake. Thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me, Billy and Brady. Excited to get into it.
Yeah, it was actually a really interesting timing having you on. I had just helped teach a WSET 2 class, and they go around the room asking everybody how they got inspired in wine and what inspired them to take the class. And one person said they actually had a ONEHOPE wine, and they looked into your mission and tasted throughout some of your portfolio. And that's what inspired them to take a WSET 2 class. And then your team reached out right after that. So it's really interesting timing.
I love hearing that. Those stories never get old when you hear about your brand or product out in the wild with customers, let alone people that are inspired by it and go out and make an impact themselves by starting something or getting involved in wine or the such.
Yeah, it was really cool. That was actually my first time hearing about it, so I dug in a bit after that as well. But for our listeners, could you give a little background on yourself, and then also we'll dive into ONEHOPE a ton in this whole interview.
Yeah, first off, my name's Jake. I'm 41. I was born in 1983 in Chico, California, while my folks were going to college there. Not standard college experience. They had come back from being in the U.S. Army and traveling around Europe together for a handful of years, and had my older sister, Michelle, in New Zealand, and then decided to come back and go to college in Chico. And that's where I was born. So that's where my journey gets started. They move out to the Bay Area 2 years later, and my mom starts her business as an entrepreneur, really kind of out of our home with her partner at the time. And from there, I never had family in the wine industry along the way. My dad was in construction and my mom was an entrepreneur in marketing and consumer. And my start begins right after college, after UC Berkeley, graduated there and got a start in the wine industry with Gallo. And at the time, it seemed really like a really sexy and fun and romantic industry. The combination of that and the opportunity to get started down in Newport Beach as my territory was enough for me to pack my bags and move from Northern California to Southern California and start my career in wine.
Yeah, we mention often when we have guests on that everyone comes to wine a different way. And it's fun to hear about folks who came up selling wine, like actually on the ground. I assume you were selling to brick and mortar or managed accounts in that area. Is that the role that you had?
Yes, my territory was in Orange County, and it went from Southern Orange County up to Seal Beach and out to Irvine, California. And in my head, I was like, oh, I'm going to go do like white tablecloth restaurants and pour fine wines. But my job was with Gallo, a tiny little boutique winery you may have heard of. And in reality, I was in like the back of Stater Brothers and Ralph's grocery stores, down stacking pallets and doing manual labor, stocking shelves, not even just with wine, with canned soup and fruit and stuff like that. And you would work with the team and then afterwards, of course, always ask for your wines to be in the best spots throughout the store so you could display them and get eyeballs on them. And so that was the job early on, was building relationships through working hard next to people in grocery stores. And it was great, though. It gave me an opportunity to see how the shelves move and see how retail and one part of retail works along with distribution to get it there. And I started to get the early understanding of one part of the wine industry, which is a really big industry with lots of layers to it. And so that was my first introduction, though.
Before we moved on the grocery store point, I did a little bit of that too when I was working for a local producer. I had no idea that wine companies actually were the ones who like stocked the shelves and made sure all the labels were straight. Like I always thought those were like grocery store people, but little do you know, wine people are getting there early in the morning and doing all of that for the grocery store.
Yeah, definitely. Or at a minimum, sharing the responsibility for it. So I would at least make sure mine were faced. And if you have a really good liquor manager, they'll take care of the wine aisle for you. But I had a duster in my back pocket. I had a box cutter on my hip. I had a little clip. Thought that was cool at the time. It was like a holster. And I always had POS on me too, at point of sales. So it would be like shelf talkers and things like that. And you're really just taking care of your product in the store. But also if you take care of the store, that's what I learned, really built rapport with the store managers is like, hey, I'm going to try to help your store out in general. And then in particular, I'm going to make sure that my product looks really good on your shelves and the sell-through is as good as possible. So yeah, definitely a team effort, but more than the suppliers are in there merchandising their own products on top of the store.
Yeah, sorry, we're having a tough time today. You mentioned early on that it was like, oh, this is going to be, I'm in a sexy industry. You're not describing a super sexy part of the industry. So did you have any conflict early on when you thought I'm getting into wine, but I'm actually, like you said, in the back of grocery stores? Did that cause conflict, or was all that just exciting and you were ready to dive in anywhere?
Look, I was 21 going on 22 years old at the time when I started that job. And so I was making a few $1,000 a month living on the beach in Newport Beach and was humble enough to know that I was paying my dues. I had done it before in sports throughout my career and in all learning that I've done. But a lot of my experience was playing team sports in college and high school. And it felt very much like that kind of a team and that kind of a work effort. It was waking up early in the morning. It was actual physical labor. And it was one of my best skill sets at the time was being able to carry heavy boxes and stuff. So it was really well suited. I didn't think I was above that work by any means, just because I had gone to a fairly fancy public school of UC Berkeley and gone to the Haas Business School there. I was down to get my hands dirty. And I think that's why I did really well in sales was you're connecting with people who work in a grocery store. And so you get a huge range of people. And it's no different than on a rugby team or a football team. You're going to meet people from all kinds of different backgrounds. And I really embraced it. And I love the wine industry because of the range of people that touch it, from the farmers and the viticultural side and the agricultural side of it, all the way to the most romantic side, which you mentioned I had to envision, which is probably at the height is the on-premise experience, right? In a tasting room or in a nice restaurant, and pairing food and wine is really the most aspirational experience you can get. And the only thing better than that is being in the vines and seeing where the fruit comes from. And so I've gotten to do all of it throughout my career, but I just started at one spot and I saw enough opportunity throughout the overall industry of things that I was excited about to where it caught my attention early. And since then, I've devoted the large majority of my career as an adult to this industry, the wine industry, but even more so with ONEHOPE to making an impact in the world and the purpose side of what we do. And we do a bunch of other things that aren't so traditional for the wine industry, like built software to built community, which is, I think, that next level of the wine industry. Has so much to do with building community. And so I've gotten to do all these other cool things because wine is such an interesting product with so many layers to the industry.
So did you know at what point in your journey did you know that you would be able to start your own brand and merge these two things, like this sort of charitable impact and wine idea around community? Was there an aha moment where you saw an opportunity to take a step? Was this much later? Take us through that.
I'm about 4 months into that first job, and I'm stocking shelves one morning at about 4 a.m. with Campbell's soup on an end cap. And I saw a pink ribbon on it that said, "This can helps in the fight against breast cancer." No more than 15 minutes later, I'm stocking Yoplait yogurt into a milk box and I see it on the lid. send this in and 10 cents goes to the fight against breast cancer. And a little light bulb goes off and I'm like, oh, there should be a wine brand that's giving back. And that's the initial idea. A month later, I'm still in the grocery stores, of course, and all the pink ribbons have gone away and breast cancer awareness month has come and gone. And I was like, if I build a wine brand that gives back, it's going to give back to more than just breast cancer. And it's going to give back year round instead of 1 month out of the year and one cause. And so I do what most people do when you have this great idea, which is nothing. So I do nothing for 6 months. And then I had one of my closest friends from growing up in Fremont, basically on the same block as me, my first kind of friend girl growing up as a little kid, calls me and her voice is quivering on the other side of the line. And she shares the news that she has blood cancer. And I'm 22 at the time. It's April of 2006. And I've never had anything like that happen in my life. A friend my age get really sick. I lived a really fortunate life, I come to realize, to go that long without having somebody who I loved have something like this happen. And on one hand, it made me really scared. It scared the shit out of me. And it made me realize life is short. And then on the other hand, it made me realize life is short, and it emboldened me. And it made me realize I'm going to do this. And so I flew home to see her the next day. I told her that I was going to start this company while she was going through her chemo and radiation and everything. And I flew back to Newport, where I was living at the time, and I incorporated ONEHOPE in April of 2006. So I've devoted now 18 years of my life to this business. It wasn't until June of 2007 that a handful of other people joined me, who all left from the same program that I was in wine, to start this. 4 men, 4 women at the time. And June 2007, we drive our first 3 pallets of wine down with labels Hope Wine on the front that had been designed in our apartment, and loaded them up into a public storage unit and started selling out of the back of our cars. And so there's a couple times where it was the beginning. The spark is that first idea. The flame is when the spark turns into a little more and it gets real. And then you have some people add some fuel to that fire, and you get some people who believe in it. And today there's still 6 of us involved in the company and 4 of us that work on it as day-to-day executives. And that's a pretty amazing story to have start with 8 kids in their early 20s who have no experience in wine, no family in wine, to build something. And none of us were married and none of us had kids. And now the 6 of us are all married. We have great partners. We have 13 children now between all of us. One of our partners just had a kid a couple weeks ago. And then I have a 14th on the way with my wife. So 14 kids. And it's the most non-traditional family wine brand that you've ever heard of.
So how did you start that first bit? Were you working with people from like Gallo? How did you source that wine? And I guess also, how did you decide on what to do? And then the third part is, everybody who works in wine knows how hard margins are. Like, how did you work out enough to carve out some money for charity at the same time?
Yeah, great questions. First off, on the winemaking side, Google was still pretty new at that time, but I Googled winemaker and charity, and I got a list of like 10 things that I had dug up where there were winemakers from Northern California that were mentioned working on these charitable endeavors or a gala or whatever else. And so I started calling them, and I ultimately tracked down this guy, and he took a meeting with me up in Northern California, and I brought 3 bottles with the printer labels on it. And I unveiled my brand and I said, I think you can help me with making some wine. And he's like, I'm not really the right fit for this project, but I've got this guy. And so he kicked me over to this guy, who then introduced me to the vice president of this company in Grayton, California, called Sonoma Wine Company at the time. And they were just in the early stages of investigating doing custom crush program. And we were like their first customer to do that with. And they peeled off a pallet of Chard, a pallet of Cab, and a pallet of Merlot to start the business with. And that's how we found our first winemaker. The next one, Rob Mondavi Jr., is a crazy story that happens after 3 years of telling your story and talking about your brand and things. And you happen to run into Michael Mondavi, not knowing that it's Michael Mondavi. And he introduces you to his son, the grandson of Robert Mondavi. And 9 months later, you're working on your first vintage of wine together. And so that was the next twist. And since then, we've built like a world-class winemaking team, right? Ranging from our head winemaker, Isadora Frias, who's this young Brazilian phenom, chemical engineer meets food scientist, incredible technical winemaker and great artist. And then you surround her with Philippe Melka and Mayan Klochowski and some of the best winemakers of our generation. And then Rob Mondavi Jr., full circle, starts making his wines at your winery and his family wines and most coveted wines there. And all of a sudden you have this dream team making wines, but it's this little like 17-year overnight success of building a world-class winemaking team. And so that's on the winemaking side, and we've come a long way, but that's how we got started. And then when it comes to marrying wine with a cause and the margins already being hard with wine, it was one of the reasons why early on I realized that direct to consumer was going to be really important for us, because as you guys seem to understand, about 60 cents on the dollar in a retail dollar wine goes to the distributor and the retailer, unless you're selling direct to the end consumer. But getting to the end consumer is really hard if you don't have a flagship winery right in the corridor of the Napa Valley or some of these traffic places, or if you don't have a big digital presence, which is hard to build. And so we went after both those things. We said, we're going to build a flagship tasting room in the heart of Napa amongst the greatest wine families in the history of Napa Valley. And we did that in Rutherford, the next winery north of the famous Robert Mondavi and Opus One wineries on Highway 29. And then we also said, we're committed to building an ambassador program that's going to share our wine directly with consumers and bring the Napa wine tasting experience to their home. And if we're able to do that, there's enough margin in a luxury product like wine to be able to give back 10% of every purchase to the customer's cause of choice. And today we power a platform that gives the people the ability to host a wine tasting event and raise money for their cause, their kids' school, their breast cancer walk. They also earn rewards. So they get 10% of their sales towards also buying wine and getting to experience the product. We make it really easy for them to buy a tasting kit and host a tasting event. And with customers, we give them the ability to give back year round through our wine club, and they can direct it, like I said, towards their kids' school or towards their pet adoption clinic or whatever cause they want. We have a database of over 100,000 nonprofits, and our customers and hosts add to that all the time. So that's how we've been able to do it, is building it into the model. I think for the wholesale side, we are in restaurants and hotels, and we do distribute on premise to thousands of points of distribution still to this day, which is where we started the business. But for that side, you can't obviously give the customer a lot of control over directing their donation. So we built that ability online. On the wholesale side, we've funded over 3.5 million meals to date. So we donate towards local food pantries in the regions that our distributors are in state by state. And we've decided that's the most transparent and direct way we can impact the communities around where those sales are happening.
Did you recognize early on that there was an sort of important factor of understanding quality, the underlying quality of the product and of the wines, and maybe of the perceived seriousness of the product paired with the charitable component? I think there are some brands out there that have sort of their product and their cause, and maybe they sell like lower grade or less serious product, something you guys don't do at all. And you mentioned your world-class winemaking team. Was it important from you to preserve that quality, seriousness, and like sense of place there in California as a part of that mission to scale into that part of the industry, or were those maybe detached until later on?
Great question. It took a while to get to the place where our wines were as serious and good as they were across the entire portfolio. We started with an average net bottle price of $6 a bottle that we were selling to a distributor, and then the distributor was selling to the retailer. And that's because the wines we were creating couldn't compete at more than like $12 to $15 price point. Today, our entry-level price point is $25 to $30, and over half of that portfolio has 90-point ratings or above. And I'm proud of all of our wines, and I'm happy to serve them at my own dinner table, regardless of across the entire portfolio. And that was my commitment over time. But early on, you take 3 pallets of wine, you take what you can get and what you can afford, and you work backwards from that. And so, of course, all those pieces were in place. And so people are buying because they love the purpose and the story and they want to support you as a founder. But to keep those customers and to build retention over time, the wine has to keep getting better. The package has to keep getting better. The winemaker's story has to keep getting better. The sense of place has to get there. And so that's why it takes so long, because the chicken and egg story of building something is you're bending reality. You've put out this vision, but none of it exists yet, right? The property is not real yet. The package isn't beautiful yet. The winemaking team isn't there yet, but you have a vision and people buy into it. And our original vision was to build the adult version of Girl Scout cookies, which was a nice, simple way to share what we were trying to do. The vision today is to build the most innovative, iconic, and impactful wine brand of this generation. That's a huge vision. And so I think starting out with saying, hey, we're going to build this and a product first, that was important. And people got behind that initial vision, and it gave us enough momentum to get to the next vision and the next one. And you're always moving the goalposts as you grow the vision over time. What hasn't changed is the purpose. That's been our North Star since the very beginning, and it's never moved. And it's to nourish the future, 3 words. And that purpose is what kept us coming back every day to the drawing board. The vision moves over time, but the purpose doesn't.
Yeah, I think it's compliments to you guys in being able to marry those two things, because I could certainly see someone seeing a product like this that has a charitable component saying, okay, I'll pick up a bottle, but getting someone to commit to a half a case, 2 cases, make it the wine that they serve guests consistently at their house. That's really the unlock when I assume when you start to think about how can this thing get really big. And I think it's awesome that you guys have created a product that marries those two things so well together.
Yeah, early on, people would try it the first time because of the charity, but the way you're going to get them to come back is by hitting both, right? Like the impact and giving to really good causes and meaningful ones. It needs to be the bonus, even though it's so much more than that, and it's woven into the fabric of the business. For the customer, it needs to be what separates you. And the wine is table stakes. It needs to be excellent. If you're competing here in the heart of Napa, if you're competing on the shelf at affordable luxury price point, anywhere from the affordable luxury to ultra luxury, product has to be amazing and package has to check the box, like all those things. And then if on top of it, you can make people feel good about their purchase and turn a luxury product where maybe sometimes people are less likely to go and want to tell people about it into something where they're really proud that. And it's an affordable luxury, not just because you're buying a great bottle of wine, but because you're able to also give back at the same time. That's a real luxury too, is being able to give back to people when you could just through having a nice dinner with a glass of wine, right? But I will say early on, that was a real challenge where people were like, love the cause, but the wine's And so you just keep improving though, like any other business. Most things come out like a 6 or 7, and then you're iterating to get them to a 9 to 10. And now across our portfolio, everything's great. And not surprisingly, our average price point of our bottle has gone up about 5x that we sell it for. And that's over the course of a decade and a half. But it's also because we're selling higher end and finer wines and smaller production wines.
Yeah, I think that Tom's, the shoe company, was founded around the time that you guys were as well. Were you familiar with that project at that point? I think they were May 2006 was Tom's. So right around that same time. And obviously then there's been Bombas, like the sock company in 2019, consumer brand. Do you take cues from some of these other companies who've gotten incredible scale with sort of a charitable component like that?
I do. I interacted with Blake early on in Tom's and followed them. Of course, they were about a mile away from our headquarters. And I incorporated ONEHOPE in April of 2006. So you can imagine when Tom sprung onto the scene, I didn't really start seeing them until 2007 probably. And we were in the middle of just starting our business. And I think the simplicity of the buy one, give one model works nice if you're talking about shoes or socks. And sometimes we sacrifice true impact for the sake of simplicity. So like it sounds really good and it's easy for the consumer to hear. And I think keeping things simple is really important, and it's been a big part of their success. Unfortunately, Tom's got bought by private equity and then got sold a couple more times, and they've had a little bit of a bumpy run of it. And I don't know that they're built to last generationally. And then Bombas, I think, socks are a really important cause to the homeless, and they make an incredible product. I would say the difference of those two companies is one was a shoe, right? And then the other one's, I'm wearing Bombas right now because I love their socks. And so I would say if I was taking cues from either one, it's like when our vision went from trying to build a really impactful wine brand, which was the equivalent of that first vision, to adding the most innovative and iconic, that you need to go to another level. If you want to be iconic, you need to be generational, right? If you want to build the most innovative, iconic, impactful wine brand of this generation, that goes beyond thinking about just virality and quick scale and becoming big. It comes down to building a brand that can withstand the test of time. And for us, our platform, one of our biggest strengths is that we give people the ability to give back to their cause of choice. But one of our biggest weaknesses is not consolidating all of that impact into one simple thing that we do. Our purpose is to nourish the future. So everything we do comes back to serving that purpose of making the world better and leaving it better to the next generation, and how our business can be a vehicle for that, a vehicle for change and bettering the world. I think when I take signs from who I want to be as a brand, I look at the ones who are going to be around for generations to come and continue to give back to the world long after we're gone. And iconic and innovative, adding that to the vision is what's driven some of the moves we've made over time to try to build a brand that's iconic, not just giving back, but also here next door to Opus One, and every bit is as iconic from the road, right? Like that, those start to become additional layers that you add on. When I think about innovative, it's building a community of people that help us to build that property. That's really innovative. Building a modern day co-op to build a vineyard, home, and winery in the heart of Napa. That's innovative. Powering tastings in people's homes. That's innovative and different. And those are the vision is what gives us clarity around what we're doing, not just when it comes to the purpose, but what we want our brand to be in the future. And then the companies we compare ourselves to and we look at aspirationally are some of the great wine brands of this century and generation and past generations, and then some of the great brands in general, some of the great lifestyle brands.
Awesome. Yeah. So you're telling me the founder of Tom's was not named Tom. For some reason, I thought everybody back then was Tom, like the founder of MySpace, Tom, this guy, Tom. There was Tom's.
Tom's was short for Tomorrow's Shoes. And Blake McCoskey's the founder of it and came up with the idea while he was on a trip to South America. So,
yep. Clearly, I never looked into it or owned any. But I do own a lot of Bombas, so I agree with you on that. They're great. I wanted to ask now about your range of wines. I was noticing, obviously, you have a top quality winemakers there, so I'd love to hear about the California wines, but I also noticed there was some Brunello. It looks like you guys have a little bit of something for everyone, and I know you have some innovative wines as well.
Yeah, definitely. We've got the whole range. You probably saw the shimmer bottles on there too. Our sparkling wine, we have the dress trademark around glittering and shimmering the outside of a bottle. So those are really fun and a little bit less serious of a product. You talked about serious wine in the bottle. So it's a 90-point rated sparkling, but it's in a really fun bottle. And so we take our winemaking seriously and our purpose and our causes are really serious too, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. And that's an important balance. And so when we look at wines, we've got everything from our field to table red blend, that's a Central Coast blend, to some of our Vintner collection, which are California wines that range from $25 to $30. And like I said, they're highly rated wines from some of the best wine regions throughout California, including the Central Coast, Sonoma, and Napa. And then when you get into our specific AVA designated wines, and AVA is short for American Viticultural Area. For any of your listeners who aren't familiar with that term, it's DOCG. Over in our neighboring countries in Old World, And when you think about the Brunello, that's an example of one of those AVA specific wines. So we have done a small amount of partnerships with international wine families where we love their wine and we partner up and I'll do 12 barrels. So that Brunello, we did 300 cases of 3,600 bottles, small production. And it's our favorite Brunello from the Montalcino region in Tuscany. And we've done one in Spain from right in the Priorat region in Belmont with a great winemaking team there and a beautiful vineyard. So we like to give our consumers the ability to travel with their taste buds. But for the most part, our iconic collection wines and our upper end reserve wines come from a combination of very specific Napa AVAs like Rutherford, Oakville, Mount Veeder, St. Helena. And then one of our favorite regions in Sonoma is Russian River. And we have a Chardonnay and a Pinot Noir from there. And we are a global brand. We love the best wine regions of the world. We have a Red Mountain, Washington Cabernet. We are open to going to different regions just because our flagship properties here in Napa, our brand, like I said, is global and we want our reach to be global, but we also want our sourcing to be global. And we want to find incredible wines from the best wine regions throughout the world. Not surprisingly, because we're most of our focus and distribution is here in the US. The majority of our wines are from the US and are all the way to our smallest production estate wines off of our property in Rutherford, where we make Cabernet Sauvignon, Cab Franc, Sauvignon Blanc, and Fumé Blanc. We like to dabble in lots of different varietals and lots of different regions for our customers.
It's very cool. I think a lot of people, one thing that when I first heard about you guys, you were talking about the wine quality. When I first heard about you, I was like, okay, cool. I'm sure they make some, so probably mainstream wines. But then the more that I've learned about it, it is really cool that you guys have everything is at different approachability levels, but also wine nerds would know like Brunello or Priorat or Red Mountain. So it's cool that you have something that can really speak to anyone, even these individual AVAs in Napa. But speaking of a wine nerd thing, I was just talking to my wife about this the other day, quizzing her to see if she remembered. Can you explain for our listeners what the difference between Fumé Blanc and just a regular Sauvignon Blanc is?
I would love to. It's hard for me to share about Fumé Blanc without first sharing the story of how that name came to be. Do you guys mind if I share a little extra?
That's part of it.
So I'm fortunate enough to have Michael Mondavi as a longtime friend, coach, mentor. He's the son of Robert Mondavi and became the CEO and chairman ultimately of Robert Mondavi in the final years. And I asked him about Fumé Blanc the first time he ever poured it for me. And he told me this beautiful story about when his dad had bought that vineyard in 1966. And in the late 60s, they decided they were going to go over to France and visit the first growths of Bordeaux to see how they were doing vineyard management and winemaking and even pairing wine with food and the hospitality side, because they wanted to be more than just like a large production winery and making big jug wine or something. They wanted to create wine and experience wine the way that you do at the greatest wineries throughout the old world. And they went on that trip. And it wasn't until the third day after they had visited all the first growths of Bordeaux that they were driving through the Loire Valley and in the Pouilly-Fumé region. And they saw this fog set down on the vineyards. It was about 6 a.m, he said. And as the sun came up, it burned off the fog and it looked like white smoke was leaving the vines. And the guy who was driving them gave him a little nudge and was like, that's it. That's the Blanc Fumé. And it Blanc white Fumé smoke. And it looked like white smoke was leaving the vines. And he went on to tell him, we oak age our Sauvignon Blancs here. And it gives them a little bit of a smoky and oaky flavor to them. And that visual stuck with Robert and Michael, and they came back and they had 2 years of backstock of old Sauvignon Blanc that they couldn't sell. They were selling it under white table wine at the time. And they took it and they threw it in their neutral oak barrels and oak aged it. And a year later, they come out with it and they had the marketing team come up with their most creative version of Blanc Fumé. And that the most creative thing they could come up with was flipping the words to Fumé Blanc. And so it's loosely translated smoke white. It doesn't really mean anything, but it's this beautiful story of how words matter and how brands are created, and that they're really these reflections of these stories. They're reflections of memories and of people. And that's what brands are, is they're people trust a brand. That brand stands for certain types of values. For us, our values are two of them are in our name, hope and unity, and then authenticity and empowerment. And they put it on the bottle, and now all of a sudden they went from 2 years of backstock to being allocated out a year in advance and selling for 2 times the price. And so that he never really put any protections on using the word Fumé Blanc. And in fact, it's why the very first wine we ever did off our property was a Fumé Blanc with Robert's grandson, Rob Mondavi Jr., and the original winemaker that helped him make the first Fumé Blanc, Tony Coltrane. And we wanted to share that story of the great families that came before us. But also it relates to putting Sauvignon Blanc in oak barrels, but there's no real rules. You could put Fumé Blanc on anything you want because it's not protected by a trademark and there's no rules. But if you follow etiquette here in Napa, you don't put Fumé Blanc on your Sauvignon Blanc unless you've oak aged it. And for us, we follow all the same protocols when it comes to yeast, when it comes to barrel aging for 10 months on new French oak, and try to pay homage to the greats and the shoulders of giants that were on here in Napa.
And you mentioned you also have some of these truly luxury category bottles, like your Oakville cab, which is priced right alongside any other cab that you might find, reserve cab in Napa. What does it look like at that sort of tier of the portfolio in terms of even like the clientele, the demographic, the types of collectors and enthusiasts that you engage with at that level, and what's been the response from that type of consumer in the market?
The response has been excellent. We started that part of our portfolio with about 100 people that are owners of our property with us. And they range from some of the greatest athletes and musicians in the world to some of the greatest visionaries and entrepreneurs of our time to really nice families and philanthropists. And not all of them are great wine collectors, but as part of our ownership base, they're also part of our 2020 collective. And it's our way of, it's our form of HOA dues, if you will, for our own property. Is like we all are part of a wine allocation program. And then we started opening up to their friends and family, and we've grown it to hundreds of people. And it starts at $3,000 a year to be part of our allocation program, and you're receiving wines that are 100 to 300 case productions, usually the most limited production, small vineyard designate wines, or very specific AVAs, and winemaking at the highest level that doesn't really scale. We try to reach down and make some of that inventory available to our normal wine club and our average consumers. A lot of it is by allocation only through that program. And those wines need to be able to compete with all of our neighbors here. And when you're thinking about wines like that, instead of thinking about making a really good bottle of wine at scale, you're thinking about making the most extraordinary bottle of wine that reflects the sense of place to that very specific vineyard site versus maybe a region of the country. And instead of thinking about consistency, you're actually thinking about the inconsistencies of season to season and capturing a very specific place and time. And instead of thinking about exactly flavor profile for me and filling with plum or blackberry or raspberry or currants and all the stuff that you are still part of the wine profile, I'm really focusing on structure of the wine and how sugar and tannin play with each other and how acidity and alcohol play with each other in the structure of the wine. And on the mid palate, how the weight of the wine is and the texture of the wine. And when you think about the wines that we're making here, we're trying to work within this really balanced structure with really standout mid palate mouthfeel and texture and weight. And then again, letting the vineyard site speak for itself and having a lot of range from Oakville Cap to Atlas Peak, which the two vineyard sites that we have there are totally different than each other, versus our Oakville and our Rutherford are only a mile away, and they're both on the Oakville bench and Rutherford bench. And they resemble a lot of the similar characteristics, even though they're two different little micro regions. And so it just gets a lot more nuanced. It goes from trying to aim after good and great to extraordinary and timeless. And because you're doing it at such small production levels and such high touch, the price ends up going up and you don't have that much to sell anyways. And so that's what drives price on the market is supply and demand and the amount of touch and attention you have to give to wines. And it still doesn't always mean they're going to be better than your house wine. Sometimes they turn out funky and weird. and people love them all the same because they're funky and weird. And that creates some complexity in them itself. Not to get too wine geeky, but it's a little more esoteric and philosophical. But realistically, if anybody tells you it's a pure science at the $200 bottle and up level, they're full of it anyways. It becomes more about the art and some subjectivity. And so it always becomes hard to explain what differentiates a $200 bottle from a really good $40 or $50 bottle. And at the end of the day, what makes art the price that it is, and in a museum versus a really beautiful piece of art in someone's home versus a piece of art that you put up on the refrigerator, is very subjective too. It's in the eye of the beholder, like all of those things. And it gets really fun in that space because of it.
Yeah, again, just kudos to you guys for, I think, giving back over $11 million through your wine sales back to your customers' causes. I think that's incredible. And how many causes did you say you guys had in your database on your platform?
We have over 100,000 in the database. To date, our customers have given back to over 50,000 nonprofits.
Wow.
And we powered over 60,000 wine tasting events and fundraisers. So beyond the 11 million that's been created through direct donations through the wine sales, tens of millions more has been raised on the events that people have gathered around. That wine is this great gathering point, such a social product, and food and wine even more. And so we've been able to raise a whole bunch more because of that. And we've also built out our own giving platform and foundation for people who don't have a cause that's necessarily important to them, or that they, off the top of their head, they want to raise for. And so over time, we've been able to build schools. We've been able to fund over 3 million meals. As I touched on, we've been able to fund about 100 clean water projects that have provided clean drinking water to over 100,000 people throughout the world. And so it's not just the dollar amount. It's creating a platform for people to give back to their cause of choice. But it's also about, like, where do we direct the funds that people donate and how do we make a sustainable impact? We've chosen to focus on breaking the cycle of poverty over time more and more. So that's why children's education, meals, these basic needs have stood out, water. And in the coming year, our goal is to underwrite distribution of over $10 million of donated school supplies to regions throughout the U.S. that are under-resourced. So teachers and students in areas where teachers are coming out of pocket $1,000, $2,000 a year on top of being underpaid, so that their kids can have base level school supplies. And so the fun thing about what we're doing is you give other people the ability to raise for what they want to, but over time, we've started to build this donation platform that helps people direct towards things that are really meaningful to us and what we've chosen to give back to.
Yeah, and all of that paired with, like you said, such thoughtful and high quality winemaking as well, and low case production at the top end. I think that all of that is super intriguing for an enthusiast and for someone who wants to tie their excitement for wine to a cause. All of that I think is phenomenal. Thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, for collectors and stuff, the experience we built up at the winery with having a full-time chef who worked for Morimoto, Chiarello, came to us from being the chef at Four Seasons, and Chef Esteban, he calls himself Chef Esteban, and he's an extraordinary chef. We've created an incredible food and wine experience to pair bites with different wines in the portfolio. And then we built this community we call the 2020 Collective. And these are people who are receiving 2 cases of wine a year, a case in spring and fall, and then this magnum each year we call our Visionary Magnum. That's like a time capsule of the impact that we made that year. And it's a huge collector's item. And I think between those pieces, along with the food and wine experience that you can get at the property, and also being able to use it kind of like a Soho house in the heart of Napa, it's really resonated with that next level of clientele who's looking to spend thousands of dollars a year on wine, but even more so to spend thousands of dollars a year on experience and on community. And so we've grown that quite a bit over the last few years, and it's been one of the really bright spots through a really turbulent few years with all the other things that were happening in the world since 2020. Completing our property in the heart of Napa and opening up our winery and building that community has been really, really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like you'll certainly reach the aspirations that you have over these next 19 years growing the business. It sounds like you have really awesome infrastructure, and it sounds like a good team too behind it that's executing all of that. Yeah, thanks so much for joining, for joining and sharing with us. Running out of time here, but really glad that you could come and share the story.
Yeah, wine is not for the faint-hearted. It's taken a lot of resilience, and we've had to be relentless. It's easy to talk about all the highlights and where we are today, but the reason why the 2007 F-150 with all the dents in it still sits out in front of the winery and tasting room is to remind our team and to be part of the story. Is like, we started on the public storage unit, and we've always reached beyond our means. And and it's hard, it's stressful, no matter what size business you are. If you're trying to grow and get better beyond where you are today, there's a certain amount of struggle and pain that comes with it. And when you combine the agricultural side of the supply chain to actually scale the brand, unlike socks or t-shirts or shoes or any of the other things we talked about, this is a live, breathing product. And you're turning it into a timeless art piece, or maybe not timeless, but one that will last decades and generations of stored. And it's really unique in that regard. And no matter what industry you're in, whether it's wine, which is particularly hard, or other industries, to all the entrepreneurs who are out there or people who are thinking about it, just a final shout out and being really real that it is hard. And if it was easy, everybody would do it. And so I have no regrets. I've learned a lot. I've made a lot of mistakes, and I feel that much more prepared for the next couple of decades going forward. And my rate of learning has always been the thing I tried to refocus on when everything went wrong or when it got hard. Is, are you learning? What's your rate of learning? And if you keep that up as an entrepreneur, you will figure it out, and you will crack an industry or industries. There's so many things going on in this industry, but it's been around for millennia, and it's here to stay. Anybody who's jumping in, good luck to you, and do it. It's worth it.
All right. I hope everybody enjoyed our interview with Jake Cleberdens. Go check out ONEHOPE if you would like to purchase some charity-driven wines. They still have their Black Friday sale till the 20th. And then definitely go to the Vint Marketplace. You can find great deals all the time. You don't need to only wait for Black Friday for our special deals. And then you can also enter to win a Coravin Sparkling, as Brady had mentioned. Go to our YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube, and leave a comment on this episode, and you will be entered to win a Coravin Sparkling. That is our episode for this week. We'll be back with another episode next week. Cheers.